When Switch 2 hype was reaching a boiling point, everyone was waiting with bated breath for Nintendo to release a new game worthy of a new console. And Nintendo, doing as Nintendo does, subverted expectations. Where everyone expected a brand new 3D Mario, they gave us a new 3D Donkey Kong instead. When it was initially revealed, Donkey Kong Bananza was a standout amongst its peers, because it felt like Nintendo was making a big push for this character. Not only did Donkey Kong get a fancy new redesign with Mario Kart World, but DK is also the star of Super Nintendo Land's latest expansion, he's rumored to be getting his own movie, and now here he is headlining his own game for the first time since 2014. A game that would go on to serve as the first post-launch first-party title for the Switch 2. There was a Donkey Kong storm on the horizon, and while I was no doubt excited as a big fan of the guy myself, a part of me was also anxious, because as Donkey Kong the character had flourished in the public eye, Donkey Kong the video game series had begun to feel like the ugly stepsister of the Mario franchise. While the games are widely regarded as some of the best platformers to grace the world of Nintendo to this day, Donkey Kong has been a fairly absent series in recent years, with the only DK sightings on the original Switch being remasters of older games or appearances in the Mario spin-offs. So going into this latest adventure on the Switch 2, I was worried that they might have lost the sauce. But that fear would quickly be assuaged, as Donkey Kong Bananza is one of the best games I have ever played. Period, no exaggeration, no jokes, no ifs, ands, or buts, it's that good. And after marathoning through the game, I found myself consistently impressed by how everything came together to make such a stellar final product. So much so that all I've wanted to do is gush about it. So let's talk about Donkey Kong Bananza and what makes it so groundbreaking. Get it? Groundbreaking? Bananza opens with Donkey Kong working his job at the banana mines, which he apparently has, when he stumbles upon the game's main collectible, a Banandium gem. And from the very second you get your hands on the controller, this game gives you a level of freedom that is borderline overwhelming. DK being able to punch through dirt and dig through these massive areas is one of those ideas that I can't even begin to comprehend the development work behind. Most every surface in the game is some form of destructible, and you're encouraged to smash through things in whatever way you see fit. I've always been a big proponent of games that make things feel good to do, and this punch is a prime example. Not only is it animated in a satisfying way, with all the debris flying around everywhere and HD rumble on the controllers making you feel the impact of every hit, but you're also very frequently rewarded with gold for destroying these dirt chunks, giving you a tangible benefit to letting loose and just punching around. It reminds me of Lego games and the inherent satisfaction that comes from destroying all these Lego set pieces to get the little studs, except this time around it's the whole game, and while there are eventually hard walls you can't punch through, they're pretty deep in there. Combine that with movement abilities that feel just as good to execute. Donkey Kong is pretty fast on his feet, he can freely climb up walls, his iconic roll now acts as a speedy dash that can be performed in the air, and you can even rip chunks out of the ground to surf on them and eventually use them as a double jump. Everything comes back to how you interact with your environment. Different materials play with each other in different ways, and with all these ideas being thrown at the player at once, it's no wonder so many people get lost in this first area. It's literally built for you to mess around in. But the game very quickly teaches you what is and isn't worthwhile, and reins the player back a bit before letting them loose for real. After a fair bit of exploration, the banana mines of Ingot Isle are mysteriously plunged into the underground by a giant meteor. And not too long after that, DK bumps into this little fella known as the Odd Rock, a rock creature who seems to be particularly fond of music, using its own musical abilities to do away with this purple metallic stuff that seems to be cropping up everywhere. Diving deeper into the earth, the duo discover a whole society beneath the caves helmed by the Kong Elder, a wizened DJ who has taken up residency in the underground. The Elder proceeds to teach us all about Bananzas, special music tracks that have the power to make Donkey Kong transform and reveal Odd Rock's true self to be a younger Pauline. Despite showing initial hesitation to the idea of singing in front of a crowd, Pauline eventually gives in, giving us access to the Kong Bananza, with the Elder then advising them to continue diving deeper into the earth to find the Banandium root located at the planet's core, which supposedly grants the wishes of those who find it. All of this is overheard by the Director of Intelligence at the Voidco Mining Company, also known as the ones who plunged Ingot Isle into the ground earlier in order to steal their banana gems, and the ones behind the mysterious purple stuff that sealed Pauline into Oddrock. And now their president, Void Kong, also seeks the Banandium root for himself. From here, we have a pretty clear mission statement. We gotta make our way to the planet core before Voidco, discovering new layers, meeting more elders, learning more Bananzas, and gathering bananas along the way. And to those of you deep in the Nintendo sphere, this structure might seem a little familiar. What's important to understand about Donkey Kong Bonanza is that this isn't a continuation of the Country series or another 3D Donkey Kong in the vein of Donkey Kong 64. Rather, this is more of a Super Mario Odyssey 2. Now obviously it's not a true sequel, in fact all signs point to this being something of a prequel, but Bananza boasts the same open-ended approach to platforming, progression through collectathon gameplay, and whimsical buddy cop narrative in a strange new land that made Mario Odyssey so successful. And I know public opinion on Mario Odyssey is kind of flip-flopped over the years, but back when it first came out, it was widely regarded as one of Nintendo's best, and all this time later, I personally still feel pretty good about it. But Donkey Kong Bonanza is so good that it recontextualizes a game that everyone saw as one of the best into being a pretty good stepping stone for the actual heavy hitter. Like, one of the biggest problems I have with Mario Odyssey looking back is the pace. At multiple points in the game's story, they just plop you into a new area, tell you to grab however many power moons, and then lock you down until you collect them so you can move on. The moons never really do anything for the player, and so many of them are placed haphazardly into not very interesting places, so it makes collecting all of them feel like a chore. Compare that to Bananza, where the Banandium gems actually act as something of an experience system. Collecting 5 of them gives you a skill point, which can be used on this massive skill tree to upgrade DK's abilities. This gives you both a proper motivation to seek out these bananas and a meaningful reward for doing so. More bananas equals a stronger Donkey Kong. And while you're encouraged to grab as many of these as possible, you're never forced to just sit there and grab some in order to progress the story. In fact, aside from some stuff in the post-game, story progression and banana progression seem to be completely independent of each other. And while it may sound like a negative to not have the main collectible influence the story at all, in application you never even realize they're not intertwined because the extra abilities you get for collecting them all feel worthwhile. Bananas are placed almost as sporadically as the moons are in Odyssey, but in the context of DK being able to punch through everything, you're stumbling upon them more often. And I think one of Bananza's greatest strengths is how good it is at keeping things moving. Like, one of DK's signature moves in this game is a ground slam that collects nearby gold and also acts as a radar revealing nearby collectibles. And since you're always smashing through stuff and accumulating gold, you're always doing that little slam and thus always being pointed to another collectible nearby. This feedback loop kind of manifests itself as like a Mario version of one of those super stimulating, brain-hacky mobile games. It's very good at always locking in your attention with a little new thing on the horizon. This is one of those games that you kinda lose yourself in. You boot it up and then 3 hours later, you find yourself dead and unmoving on the couch, knowing nothing other than the fact that you just experienced peak. And it helps that the game looks fantastic too. I've never seen the Donkey Kong cast, let alone any Mario cast, feel this lively. I still don't love the abomination that's taken Donkey Kong's place, but the design does wonders for making him look expressive, and you can tell that that was a priority for the developers. They let this man act his ass off. He's always doing something, and the same can be said for a lot of the folks he shares the screen with. I think a lot of people were worried when they saw new faces once again take the place of Donkey Kong's usual extended cast, but I found myself decently charmed by everyone I bumped into. From returning faces to Voidco to even the random filler characters inhabiting the individual sublayers, I was a big fan. Although I don't feel as strongly about the worlds you find them in. A lot of them feel like they could have just been Mario Odyssey levels, which is a bit of a bummer because Donkey Kong levels are typically more dynamic and visually striking than Mario, whereas they feel pretty similar here. But regardless of the set dressing, the levels are big enough to encourage exploration without feeling aimless, and in combination with Donkey Kong's robust moveset and various Bananza transformations, allow for a free-form, player-oriented experience no matter the objective. The Bananzas themselves range from what feels like souped-up versions of Donkey Kong's base moveset to absolutely game-breakingly overpowered. especially when the only requirement for Bananza transformations is gold, something that the game already gives out to you in spades, but each of the 5 transformations have a specific use case that never leaves one feeling like it obviously outshines the others. Kong Bananza is used to destroy hard concrete, Zebra Bananza keeps you moving fast, Elephant Bananza is good for clearing out large amounts of material, Snake Bananza has the ability to slow down time, and my favorite by far, Ostrich Bananza, boasts not only a very funny character design in a deeply unsettling kind of way, but also gives Donkey Kong a glide, which in a 3D platformer opens up so many doors for the player. These abilities come straight out of the Nintendo school of small things that can be applied in a mind-numbing amount of different ways, and even if a decent chunk of these levels can come off as a little more on the generic side, there are still some fun ideas on display. When one of these levels hits, they hit. There's a beach layer filled with giant fruit for you to punch through, a landfill layer that takes place entirely underground, making excellent use of the game's destructible environments, a layer that features a giant food carnival where you have to make a really big burger, a handful of smaller layers that deliver on that more surreal and liminal vibe that I crave from Donkey Kong, and there's even a layer where you engage in some Diddy Kong racing with Diddy and Dixie. Granted, their layer is the shortest and least interesting one in the game by a wide margin, but the fan service on display here is so nice that I almost don't mind. And speaking of fan service, there's a lot here. I know I've mostly been comparing this game to Mario Odyssey, but they don't forget their Donkey Kong roots, and it's fun seeing all of these longtime Donkey Kong staples get reinvented in new ways. Balloons now save you from pits instead of acting as your lives, Rambi is now kind of like a racehorse, the fossils are shaped like familiar characters from Donkey Kong Past, and I would be remiss not to mention the single best thing about this game, Pauline. Pauline's inclusion here asks a lot of questions about the wider Mario lore that the game itself is largely uninterested in answering. Like how Cranky Kong can be here, complaining about Mario and the events of the original DK arcade game when Pauline is a child and New Donk City supposedly already exists, but it's easy to ignore these timeline discrepancies when the concept they're thrown out in favor of is so strong. Pairing up Donkey Kong, a character known for having his little buddies riding around on his back, with Pauline, the character that the original Donkey Kong supposedly kidnapped in the arcade game, or possibly her granddaughter, and making them into a cute little buddy cop duo is such a fun idea. I've seen a lot of people liken their dynamic to something like Vanellope and Wreck-It Ralph, a curmudgeonly everyman and his spunky sidekick that changes his worldview, but what I really like about this team-up is that they actually have the complete opposite dynamic. Donkey Kong is a free-willed spirit trying to get the timid Pauline out of her shell, and I think the whole story that unfolds between them is one of this game's biggest highlights. For a company that tends to shy away from stuff like traditional voice acting and proper storytelling, I was blown away by the production value put behind this game's narrative. It's not the most involved thing in the world, but I've gone through multiple Mario games where there isn't much of a story past go save Princess Peach, and seeing how things unfolded for DK and Pauline had me genuinely emotionally invested by the end. But before we talk about that ending, and trust me, we will be talking about that ending, I just want to say that I set out to beat this game as fast as possible for content purposes, and even with me deliberately speeding through the game, I got sidetracked enough to get 666 out of the 777 available Banandium gems when I bested the last of this game's story content. This wasn't me going for completion, this was just raw world intrigue. And you bet your ass when things slow down, I'm gonna be diving back in to get the rest of them because Bananza makes it really easy for us freaks who are trying to 100% it. Not only is there a lot of easily accessible information about which things you have and haven't collected, but you also very frequently stumble upon these maps which reveal the locations of different collectibles on the in-game map, removing a lot of the guesswork from the experience and streamlining the completion process. And coming off the heels of Mario Kart World, there are not words for how gracious I am to finally have a proper progression tracker. Video on this one soon, by the way. Subscribe so you don't miss it. All in all, the only real thing I have to complain about here is the boss fights. For a game that is otherwise so clearly firing on all cylinders, Donkey Kong Bonanza's boss fights are disappointingly shallow. This game isn't the most difficult thing in the world. Even the post-game super challenges I found to be fairly painless, and for the most part, I don't mind an easy game, but these bosses in particular that feature great designs and interesting ideas are severely held back by just how easy they are to defeat. Multiple times over, I found myself thinking that these concepts would make great boss fights if they didn't take 20 seconds to beat, and when a boss fight is meant to be the big swan song of a level before moving on to the next, it leads to a lot of these set pieces ending on more of a whimper than a roar. But there is one boss fight that this doesn't apply to. Spoilers from here on out. So after a while of DK and Pauline making their way through the various layers of the planet and befriending the Bananza elders, we make our way to the Forbidden Layer, a quiet void where the residents do nothing but tell us to leave. And soon after, we discover the Banandium root, a pulsating golden mound poking out of the ground. Void Kong is quick to catch up to us, revealing that he needs the power of Pauline singing in order to awaken the root. And after another fairly trivial boss fight that focuses more on spectacle than difficulty, he is defeated. But not before he can seal DK in that purple metallic rock stuff from earlier. Void gives Pauline an ultimatum. She can use her singing powers to free DK, but that will ultimately awaken the Banandium root and give Void exactly what he wants. However, after some encouragement from within Donkey Kong's rock prison, Pauline realizes that nothing is stronger than the power of friendship and sings, breaking the seal on Donkey Kong much like how he broke the one on her at the top of the game. Donkey Kong and Pauline have a cute little reunion, all while Void Kong is quick to dive onto the Banandium root for himself. But Void Kong is unexpectedly blasted backwards into the sky by a familiar fist, revealing the gold mound of the Banandium root to be none other than the big belly of King K. Rool. And I feel like we need to take a step back and acknowledge just how big of a deal this is. After 4 appearances as the final boss in various Donkey Kong games, King K. Rool kind of faded out of being a series regular when the original Donkey Kong Country developer Rareware was purchased by Microsoft. And as the series changed hands and ultimately dwindled in relevance throughout the 2000s, K. Rool became less an expected villain and more of a funny memory to those of us who watched the old cartoon. He would appear sporadically in spin-offs, making prominent appearances in DK King of Swing, Mario Super Sluggers, and the infamous Donkey Kong Barrel Blast, but by the time Donkey Kong Country was fully rebooted in 2010 with Donkey Kong Country Returns, K. Rool was more or less retired by Nintendo. That is, until Super Smash Bros. Ultimate brought him back into the limelight in 2018, with a trailer and moveset so lovingly crafted that you would think he was here the whole time. King K. Rool was back, and he was directly put on the same pedestal as other classic Nintendo villains Bowser, Ganondorf, Meta Knight, and Ridley. So going into the first new Donkey Kong adventure in over a decade, all eyes were on Bananza to see if this would be the glorious return of our king and his army of Kremlings. And I'll tell you guys, at this point in the game, I had basically lost all hope. Obviously, as a big Donkey Kong guy, I went into this experience huffing that King Copium rule, but in the lead up to this game's release, it felt like Bananza was much more interested in bringing in something new and redefining the Donkey Kong formula than it was in celebrating the old. References to the country games were sparse, the theories people were coming up with to justify his inclusion all felt like stretches, and Nintendo isn't exactly known for their fan service, especially when it comes to Donkey Kong. This wouldn't be the first time people were desperately holding on to the idea that K. Rool was secretly going to be the big bad despite not appearing in any promotional material whatsoever. So needless to say, 15 or so hours into this game that I thought I had already gotten close to the ending of multiple times, I wasn't expecting King K. Rool to actually show up at the end and become the true final boss. And yet, here he was, 26 years after his last appearance in a mainline Donkey Kong game. For reference, that's longer than I have been alive, and they play this moment like the big return to form that this character deserves. Following this encounter, K. Rool dives even deeper into the planet, bringing us to the planet's core, where K. Rool and the Kremlings have been trapped, giving us a somewhat lore-friendly explanation for their extended absence. The planet core is less of its own level and more of a multi-stage combat gauntlet as we fight our way to the Banandium root at the center, and this combat reveals that the enemies that we've been fighting the whole time were actually skeletal versions of familiar Donkey Kong Country foes. The Crocoids are actually Kremlings, these glue wing guys are actually Neckies, these burrowing robots are Claptraps, and the ball guys are the Armadillos. This whole segment feels like an apology from Nintendo for letting this series fade away over the years, and it leads to the entire thing feeling kinda surreal. Like, I remember thinking to myself multiple times in my initial playthrough, I cannot believe that this actually exists. I can't believe that the story actually went this way. And it's also worth noting that this segment quite noticeably steps up the difficulty. They cover everything in spite spikes and make you fight a bunch of guys with annoying gimmicks. It's still not amazingly difficult, but it just shows that truly everything steps up in this final level. There's a lot of love on display for every corner of the Donkey Kong franchise. Obviously we have the enemies from Country, but the fossils look like the sprites from Donkey Kong Arcade, and in what might be my favorite connection here, when confronting King K. Rool, we discover that the Banandium root is actually some kind of biblically accurate angel creature made from the golden bananas of DK64. K. Rool uses the power of the Banandium root to transform into a larger, more banana-themed version of himself, who is once again done away with quite quickly. DK and Pauline make their wishes to go back to the surface and get bananas respectively, and both of them are swept up by a pillar of golden bananas, taking them to the sky in another apparent reference to Donkey Kong 64 as the credits roll, finishing our journey in Bananza. You thought! Much like in the original SNES game, these credits are a fake out, as King K. Rool wakes up from his prior beating and takes to the sky, chasing after Donkey Kong and Pauline in his helicopter thing from Donkey Kong Country 3. Turns out this boss fight isn't over just yet. K. Rool attacks DK and Pauline on the Banandium Tower as it spirals towards the surface, eventually emerging in Pauline's hometown of Mario Odyssey's New Donk City, where K. Rool reclaims the root for himself and proceeds to flood the city with toxic mush. And what follows might be one of the craziest gaming sequences I have ever had the pleasure of playing. Donkey Kong and Pauline have to make use of all the different Bananza forms they've acquired to navigate through the toxic remains of New Donk City as King K. Rool throws everything he has at them, and it all culminates in a boxing arena raising from the sea of mush in another apparent reference to Donkey Kong 64. K. Rool greets you in the arena and reveals that with the power of the Banandium root, he has developed a Bananza of his own, transforming into K. Rool, the King of Rot. And this is how you do a boss fight. The design is fantastic, the stakes are high, the arena is big, and most importantly, it's sufficiently challenging. It took me a good couple tries to learn all the different attacks and how to best counter them, and considering that this is going to be a lot of people's first introduction to this character, it leaves a pretty big impact. I think back to Mario Odyssey and how the whole plotline with Bowser and the wedding and the ending sequence where you get to play as him felt like a fun celebration of that character after his many appearances as the main villain. And this bit with K. Rool feels like just as big a celebration, but with a fraction of the appearances, and that's so cool! This is the kind of ending that has you jumping straight to your Google Docs to type up a history of King K. Rool. The kind of ending that makes you feel stupid for ever doubting that this character would be a fixture of Donkey Kong again. And he's only been in the game for like the last 2 hours. Everything comes together to make what feels like one of the most polished final acts I have ever seen in gaming, and this all comes after one of the most consistently enjoyable 3D platformers I have ever played. Donkey Kong Bananza is truly one of the greats, and the first of what I hope are a lot of Switch 2 bangers. It's hard to understate just how much I enjoyed everything about Donkey Kong Bananza. Every now and then a game just slaps you in the face with how good it is, and I'm so happy that that honor could go to a character and game series that I had always thought had flown a little too far under the radar. And I feel like I just barely scratched the surface. Even though I've spent the better part of the past 30 minutes waxing poetic, painting everything in as broad strokes as I could to cover as much territory as possible, I still feel like I have so much more to say. So to finish out this video, here is a segment that I am calling Small Details I Really Like in Donkey Kong Bananza That I Do Not Know How to Squeeze Into the Rest of This Script. And it's a lightning round. The cutscene showing Ingot Isle sinking into the land recreates the camera angle shown in the overworld in past Donkey Kong Country games. The lens flare on the canyon layer looks like a bunch of bananas. When initially performing a Bananza, Pauline does the little dance from Super Mario Odyssey. This dance resembles the original animation for Lady in the arcade game. Pauline also gets outfits resembling the various ways the character of Lady has been depicted over the years. Kremlings make the sound when they're defeated. Every time you sleep in one of these getaways, Pauline gets a little cutscene where she talks to DK, and these conversations range from extra world building to just cute little peeks into the mind of the future mayor. King K. Rool's boss fights feature remixes of both Gangplank Galleon and Crocodile Cacophony. The music in general is also just fantastic, my favorites being the various Bananza themes. It might be the worst transformation in the game, but every time I hear Pauline kick into the "Oh, zebra, zebra, zebra," I feel my body start to sway with the beat. And that's to say nothing of the various remixes of older tracks playing in the throwback nostalgia levels modeled after the other Donkey Kong games, which never failed to put the biggest, stupidest smile on my face. And in one of those nostalgia levels, you can visit Donkey Kong's house. And lastly, my personal favorite detail, the vocals in the bridge of the main theme of the game, Breaking Through, reused the title theme from the NES port of Donkey Kong Arcade. Also, that part makes me cry every time I hear it. Fuck. You and me, unbreakable. We're breaking through, down to the core. No stopping us, not anymore. Inside the cage, in the beast, your beat rang out. My voice has been released. Hear it call. It's shouting the truth. Just sing with me. This melody will strike the chord that's gonna break us free. Donkey Kong Bananza is nothing short of a masterpiece. It's one of the best 3D platformers ever made, it's the reason to buy a Switch 2, and it even did the impossible of getting me to like the Donkey Kong redesign. Turns out, all you needed to do was add overalls and give him pink fur to make him a handsome boy. See ya! Let's spread